Part 17. Brown Limper Staffer came away from the compound utterly ill with envy. He called it righteousness. What a horrible, vulgar spectacle. All those people crowding about, cheering even, touching his moccasins, absolutely fawning. It was more than a normal, sane man like Brown Limper could tolerate. He had felt he was losing ground lately, and he beat his head in ways to think and means, even if they were criminal, to correct this gross mistake that people were making about this Tyler. Since Johnny Goodboy Tyler had come to the village last year, prancing about, bribing people with gifts, while really only trying to do them out of their lands and their houses. And since Brown Limper had realised that Tyler was not only not properly dead, but apparently moving in a larger world, and moving far too successfully. Brown Limper had been lying in wait. When he recalled how he had been put upon and scorned and held up to ridicule by Tyler ever since they were children, he seethed. He had to be careful not to dwell on it too much, for then he would lie awake in bed and roll and toss and grit his teeth and bring on a fever. That, the instances of Tyler's doing, those things could not directly be recalled or isolated as actual incidents, only made it grinning more worse, the fact that he couldn't prove it. They must have happened, or Brown Limper wouldn't feel this way. Or would he? It proved itself, otherwise he would not be feeling like this. When he heard that Tyler was crippled and likely to die, a flood of relief had poured through Brown Limper. But here he was today, limping maybe, but certainly making a nauseating spectacle of himself with these darned silos. It was not that Brown Limper had not been trying. Some time since, when old Jimison had complained of rheumatism, Brown Limper had kindly shown him how beneficial loco weed was to aches and pains. Parson Staffer had left a supply, and Brown Limper had performed this act of humanity right after he had been startled to find that old Jimison inclining toward Tyler's criminal proposals to destroy the village and move the people to some desolate mountainside and abandon them there, to starve no doubt and to freeze. Jimison obviously could not be trusted to govern, due of course to his aches and pains, of course. Mercifully, now he had retired to his bed and awoke when his family brought him some food. It was so gratifying to see that the old man was out of his pain and not worried and harassed by village affairs. It was, of course, a bit of a burden to take on all this work on himself, but Brown Limper was patient and enduring, if a bit pious about it. When the coordinators had come from the World Federation for Unification of the Human Race, what are those initials? WFU, yeah, that sounds familiar. Brown Limper had thought of them as interfering busybodies at first. Then they had shown him some books. Old Parson Staffer, before he began to chew on local weed day and night, had taken his responsibilities seriously, both to his village and to his family. He had sought to initiate Brown Limper into the church and had brought out some hiding... This is a secret book, you see, and no one else in the village knew about it, and it was called the Bible. And in strict privacy he had taught Brown Limper how to read. But Brown Limper had not much cared for a career as a parson, and he had thought it was better to aspire to be a mayor. A parson could only persuade, but a mayor, well, now then. It was quite simple logic. There was Tyler, prancing around on his horses, ogling the girls, the young men following his lead and getting into trouble, the council soft-headed, overlooking his criminal pursuits, and there was Brown Limper, wise, tolerant, understanding, and brilliant, overlooked and even scorned and cast aside. And hadn't Tyler's own father, if he really was Johnny Goodboy Tyler's father, protested when Brown Limper was born, club-footed and mutated, and was allowed to live? Well, maybe not just Yoda's Tyler, but Brown Limper's mother used to tell him that some had protested, but that she had prevailed and saved his life. She used to tell him several times a week, and Brown Limper had gotten the message. The Tylers had attempted to murder him. Murder! Murder! So it was only sensible that he should be upset and have the right to defend himself and take measures to protect not only himself but the whole village by killing everybody else. I'm sorry, it's just that the Jews had just started exterminating Iran again. It would be utterly irresponsible not to exterminate people if they just want to live in peace and harmony. These coordinators had been delighted to find he could read and give him some text on government, and one on parliamentary procedure called Robert's Rules of Order. They had astonished him by informing him that as the active and only mayor, he was the chief of the American tribe. Apparently nearly all the peoples of America, they had to show him where it was on the globe, had been slaughtered or died off. Yahoo! His was the principal tribe, and being near the mine site, the most influential group politically. Getting right down to it, what was this council? Well, it was the heads of all the tribes from all over the world, and they met or sent their deputies to meet in a sort of parliament, right here in his front yard, so to speak. They mentioned that he, of course, should be very interested due to the fact that the Johnny came from there. Brown Leaper did not just become interested, he became obsessed. Were there any other peoples of America? Well, there were a couple found in British Columbia and 4 found in the Sierra Nevadas, a mountain range to the west. And some Indian, walla, not really from India, but called that, in some mountainous way, down in the south. And there were Eskimos and Alaskan tribes, but they didn't count geographically as America. Well, America has to own everything. Brown Limber had been making progress. Since each council member had 1 vote, he engineered the rescue of the couple of British Columbia and the 4 in the Sierra Nevadas. This was all humanitarian, of course. We have the right to defend themselves, and settled them in his village as tribes, and now claimed 3 council votes. He was just now working on the Indian question to get a member of that tribe up here and have 4 council votes. He hoped he was making progress via in other ways. At the council, he would casually and very truthfully drop remarks about Tyler, how the village had always considered him wild, rash, and irresponsible, even though he personally had tried to correct such impressions. He mentioned how, as a child, Tyler was always running around, playing and refusing to even draw water for his family, an obligation all well-behaved, thoughtful children had. He made light of any rumour that Tyler had known about the tomb all the time and had hidden the information so that he, Tyler, could go there and rob the honourable dead. Tyler only went now and again, he said, and the parson in the village had once tried his best to correct him and had even taken some of the things the boy had stolen away as a punishment. Tyler had eventually run away entirely and left his family and the whole village to starve for 2 whole winters. As to Tyler and Chrissy not being married, well, yeah, that was a village secret. The parson had found out certain things when they were children and had forbidden marriage. No, it's not Irish, don't worry. Not that Tyler cared much for authority, youth being what it was. A lot of the older chiefs from far-off places did not know much about what was going on, and wasn't Chief Stafford the only one around who had actually been Tyler's own dear companion? Just a couple of days before, Brown Limber had been argued with some ignorant lout, a chief from the Siberian tribe, and Brown Limber had feeling they didn't quite all believe him. He had been more morose. Didn't he know Tyler? The real Tyler? And now this disgusting spectacle of self-aggrandizement today? What a conceited oaf! Ugh! Ding! And now he had the nerve to go around pretending he couldn't walk. Just more mockery of Brown Limber. Brown Limber had noticed that the silo in the cage seemed to be on very good speaking terms with Tyler. While he did not know what they were saying, it was obvious that they were actually well known to each other. But he had detected a bit of frostiness there. Don't go down a frostiness route with Roger Prince Harry. That winkle will snap off. Grabbing a straw, Brian Limper decided to look into this just a little bit further and returned that evening to the compound. The sentries, of course, would not dream of saying anything to a senior council member wearing a bit of coloured ribbon that denoted his tribe, and Brian Limper, he just hung around, watching the huge silo from a distance, and he saw something very curious. A young Swedish pilot trainee stood for a while outside the bars talking to him. The sentry said, yes, the cadet did come round quite a bit as a routine. After his classes, he was polishing up his silo. All pilots had to be very expert on silo, and the monster in that cage was a real silo, and there weren't many others around to talk to. No, he didn't know what they were talking about, and the sentry couldn't speak silo, being part of the Raiders on duty here, but the cadet's name, it says here, Lars Thornson. And thank you very much, Chief Sir, for mentioning that sentries should have cloaks and promising to take it up with the next council. So using his influence, Brian Limper found in Academy records that Lars Thornson had been a member of a Swedish tribe that emigrated way back to Scotland, that he had originally been chosen as a coordinator trainee because he spoke fluent Swedish and English, and had a gift for tongues. And his father didn't like that because he didn't want him shagging his mum. But his father was a fascist minister and had urged the boy to use the Federation to spread the call of fascism in view of the fact that it had been the state religion of Sweden and had some important military figure named Hitler as its head and was needed by the world. And the boy had been dropped. Oh, if only he'd done a better fucking job with the Jews. And the boy had been dropped thereafter by the Federation but had reapplied due to the scarcity of manpower and been accepted as a flying cadet. That he was doing horribly in stunt flying was, he was now healing from a very bad landing and was temporarily suspended and probably would be sent back to the farm in Scotland on the basis that while he might have a gift for languages, it didn't seem all right in the head. Well, a senior council member could easily get the threat of that dismissal quashed. Brian Limper began to take a very definite interest in Lars Thornson, and through him, in that monster in the cage. Things were definitely looking up. Certain crimes must be corrected, even if the criminal were an old companion. That day had left Turl feeling very optimistic. It had gone off just like he knew it would. Someone sooner or later was going to get teleportation in operation again, and this planet, with what joy he had found that the animal himself was taking an interest in it. Turl was highly trained as a security chief, the best by his own admission, and he knew all about teleportation. All about it. When the animal went over to the Chamco Dome, Turl had even pleasantly waited for the shots, and they came. Turl was of two minds about the outcome. He was very pleased that there was a fight and the Chamcos had reacted exactly as predicted. And at the same time, he was disappointed the animal had only received a scratched face. It was a difficult emotional conflict to be glad the animal was shot up and the Chamcos had successfully and happy to see the animal still hobbling around alive afterwards. Well, one couldn't have everything. He waited for 2 days for the news that the Chamcos had committed suicide. It finally came to him through the stupid cadet, who would visit him every evening. Practicing talking a language required having something to talk about, so Turl would get lots and lots of gossip. You know the two silos that used to work over in the dome, said Lars, talking through the barrier and the bars? Well, they put them in a cell down in the dormitory area, and this afternoon, despite a great deal of precautions, the two hung themselves from their chains. Over a crossbeam, they broke the chains apart, made a pair of nooses with them, and they hung themselves. They could have escaped maybe, but instead they simply strung themselves up. No, says Turl, pretending he didn't even expect to hear that. The poor fellows must have been hurt terribly badly by that animal. I saw it from here. What accent was I doing for Turl? I can't remember now. For you lot, I might only be one video ago, But for me, it's been 6 bloody months, and I got my legs smashed up, my bike written off, and I've been housebound for the past 4 months. Anyway, no, says Turl. He can be a Wurzel. The poor fellow. He must have been badly hurt by that animal. I saw it from here, I did. He just stood there and kept firing into them. When his silo is hit too badly and knows he can't recover, he is likely to commit suicide. There he is. Which was about as far from the facts as Turl would allow himself to stray, without breaking down laughing. They're given a sentry and the guard sergeant drumhead court marshal, says Lars. Now, Lars can't have a Wurzel accent as well. Can't all be Wurzels. That would be too perfect. They're given the sentry and the guard sergeant drumhead court marshals. Probably send them back to Scotland. They're Argyles, Clan Argyle, that is. Yeah, not their like with the sheep. Turl clicked his fangs in sympathy over the gross injustice and said so. Lars could not agree with just how unjust the authorities could be, but he mustn't go too far. There's someone here I'd like you to meet. He's very important, a senior council member. And his member is also limpid. I won't mention his name. He's standing over in the shadows, under the pole. Do you see him? Turl had seen him the instant he took position over there. He said, Where? Ooh, that's a senior council member. So Lars, it was great practice for a silo, filled him in on the whole political background that was now functioning. And Turl said, well, certainly he'd talk about to his friend, and any friend of the cadet's a friend of his, and it seemed very important and official. It would be glorious practice for the cadet silo. So using a couple of mine radios, Brown Limper said the glaring lights in front of the cage hurt his eyes, and he had had a bit of a fever lately. A considerable amount of conversation occurred with Lars in the middle. Turl gave the politician a very good factual data. The silos were actually a peaceable people, interested in commerce, and they were only mining. A disaster had occurred 1,000 or so years ago that made it possible for the silo company to move in. No, he didn't know what caused the disaster. Probably some natural cataclysm called Jewish people. The company had tried to serve all the people, save all the people, but the inhabitants misunderstood their intentions, and they'd hid from them, and they'd hidden from their peace missions and rescue teams and their rights to defend themselves. And the company, being only a commercial company, just wanting peace and not political, had been quite poor and unable to continue with the financial burden of rescuing them and feeding them and stopping themselves from raping their babies. I'm sorry, I'm just a little bit... I live in a concentration camp called England, waiting for my children to be exterminated. Just found out last week that there's water in it, there's chemicals in the water that are sterilising people. Anyway, I got on. Yes, well, he could say that this animal, Tyler, had provoked a crisis. Well, rash. Well, yes, come to think of it, pretty rash. While, too, he knew. He had tried to befriend him, and now he, Turl, was in a cage without trial. But, of course, his feelings of guilt and desire for repentance were the real reason he wanted to be in that cage. This animal, what was his name? Tyler? He didn't know how to name. It was a very secretive, bad-tempered, in fact. Well, I mean, just look what I'd done to Turl's two best friends just a couple of days ago. And they had been so badly injured, they had now committed suicide. Oh, indeed, the Silents were a very peace-loving people. Honest, kind, just wanting to defend themselves. Good to their friends, trustworthy, just wanted to defend themselves. He himself made it a rule of his life never to betray a trust. What? Oh, yes, it was too bad this animal, Tyler, didn't have the principles and morals of a silo. Yes, he agreed someone should have taught him to be honest and upright when he was young. Oh, no, the silos would never think of a counterattack. They weren't upright to defend themselves. They weren't a military nation, and Intergact, it was only a mining company, and interested only in struggling along and staying at peace with the universe. Badly misunderstood. Oh, they'd never understood the people, the Jewish, the silos. After they left, Lars was grave-faced. Sorry, I lost more teeth. After they had left, Lars was very grateful at all the silo practice he had, and the I'm sorry, it was a different page. Where the hell am I? After they had left, Lars was very grateful for all the solid practice that he had. Gag Granville. And the shadow under the pole was seemingly delirious for further conversation. Turl hugged himself enough to crub his... I need better eyesight. Crush his rib bones. I'm reading from a monitor that is 3 meters away. He would get off of Earth. Or get off on Earth. That was for sure. His plans were really sparking. What a lucky break. He would have made it without the break, but how easy it all became. He was not only going to get home to his gold, but he was going to blow this planet out of the sky, and he was going to take a prisoner with him. They had air chambers on a silo. They could question a captive from almost any system for weeks, and very painful weeks they were. Yes, he'd take a prisoner. Not this silly cadet who knew nothing. Not that crooked, self-serving politician who was too crap-brained to know valuable information from trash. Not the animal Tyler, since he would be awfully dangerous. Well, but maybe Tyler if he had no success with anyone else. But it better be somebody else. Someone who would know all their plans and military preparations. But who? Okay, the news. Turl was hugging his ribs to keep from laughing with delight. He didn't want the sentry to log something about his conduct. Maybe the sentry would think he had a stomachache. Oh, it was too much. His professors were absolutely right. He was easily the greatest officer they had ever trained. The last finally erupted from him, but the guard had changed by then, and the new sentry thought he was just being more insane than usual. There was nothing in the log except that the cadet had been there for a routine visit to practice talking silo. The new sentry walked about. He had an odd feeling of foreboding. Had the summer night turned cold? Or was it just that insane laughter from the cage? We, said Johnny, are going to Africa. Dr. McKendrick looked up from his task of removing the cast from Thor's arm, a little startled. All the wounded Scots but Thor had left the underground hospital. Thor's arm had had to be rebroken and set, but now it was fine. And with Thor gone, the hospital would be empty save for Johnny. Dr. Allen had returned to Scotland to care for his practice, and Dr. McKendrick had been thinking about doing the same as well. As he finished cracking off the cast, Dr. McKendrick said, "We?" "Yes," said Johnny. "You are a bone man, but you're also a neurosurgeon, I think they called it." Dr. McKendrick looked at the tall young man standing there. How the fuck can you be a neurosurgeon when you don't even have electric or tools? You're just like a hammer and axe sort of thing. Anyway, that's Scottish. Dr. McKendrick looked at the tall young man standing there leaning on his cane. He liked this young man. He liked him very much. His practice of being run at home by a competent young doctor, and he was supposed that the arrangement could continue for a little bit longer. He had thought a little vacation might... Why am I going back Irish again? Fucking place. Inbreds. He had thought a little vacation might be appropriate before taking his tools in the Aberdeen cave again, but Africa... Thor was flexing his arms, looking very pleased. McKendrick told him all about the exercises he must now do to keep his muscles from collapsiating. It looked like a pretty good job of bone setting this time. Johnny beckoned, and McKendrick followed him as he hobbled into a sick room Johnny had been using. What the hell? Does this guy not know punctuation? Johnny beckoned, and Dr. McKendrick followed him as he hobbled into a sickness room Johnny had been using as an office. An old operating table covered with papers, photographs, and books. I need some desk holidays or asking some lifestyle to Johnny. Fuck. Yeah, the guy doesn't know punctuation. Oh, my freaking kneecaps. I'll need some dead saddles, and I need some laugh saddles, said Johnny. Thor in the doorway laughed. I shouldn't think you'd have any trouble with the dead ones. There's nearly 1,000 somewhere around the compound. Sorry, said Johnny. They dumped them in a mile-deep mine shaft, and the shaft is so shaky it's risky to fly down there. I spent the whole week looking for dead sailors. There is the chunk up here, said the doctor.
Sorry again, Sir Johnny, the council for some reason of its own had the bodies burned. Just what's the problem then? You start to wonder why the Intergalactic Mining Company always ship the bodies home. They don't want dead silos lying about. The parson, said Thor, cut up the pair we found in that plane. You wasn't looking what I'm looking for. Dr. McKendrick smiled. Autopsies on dead silos, Johnny. It wouldn't be a full day unless you astonished me with something. He was referring to an incident a week ago when he had been bending over, sewing up Johnny's cheek, and all of a sudden he felt a little thing right at the crack of his back, and all he said was, oh, he has no lubrication or nothing. The needle had been a little bit dull, and as a reflex, Johnny reached up with his right hand and gripped his wrist to make him ease off. McKendrick had felt a little bit contrite about the arm and leg. He had feared that he might have injured something when he operated. But the sudden movement of the arm had told him that it was just a matter of getting back into communication rather than physical damage. Johnny had tried to do it again voluntarily, but couldn't. Must be like learning to wiggle your ears, said Johnny. All you have to do is find your right muscles and pull. And how? McKendrick supposed he really should stay around and help Johnny recover. Well, said Dr. McKendrick, motivated by more the possibility of being able to help Johnny's arm and leg than any real interest in autopsies on dead silos, I guess I could go along. But why Africa? There's a live, operating, untouched silo mine down there. Thor gasped. We missed one. It isn't a full-fledged mine site. It's a branch mine site of the central mine site near what used to be called Lake of Victoria. Right about here, and he showed them on the map. Over in the west of there was deep jungle, and there was, and is, a tungsten mine. The silos are mad for tungsten. He circled an area. All this jungle, all the pictures, it all looks like tall trees, making a total umbrella. Thousands of years of growth there is down there. A recon drone doesn't even penetrate into that vast area of swamp, which is a little bit weird, as it's meant to be able to penetrate through solid frickin' rock. We chose our targets from recon drone maps. And yes, we must. It's my bet they're still sitting there listening to the strange chatter on the pilot planetary band, keeping their little furry silo heads down and waiting for a chance to break out.
Thor smiled. That's some sort of grim, Johnny. We go down there and shoot them just to get some dead bodies. I don't just want dead bodies. I want some live ones. There's a graduate engineer or 6 at every mine site. And what, said McKendrick, are these autopsies supposed to show? I don't know. So you will gather up some scalpels and come along. You're not telling me everything? Well, as a matter of fact, I'm not. This is very secret. We will state that we are going to make a tour of some tribes, and if you go for, you can even visit some. I pretend to be me. The way you used to, back up at the load. That sounds very hush-hush, said McKendrick. It is. Johnny had not liked the way things were going with the council. It was passing lots of laws one couldn't keep up, and he wasn't invited there anymore. And you're trying to solve? Why? Just why the Chamco brothers committed suicide. And why he was making no progress trying to untangle the mathematics of teleportation. For a week now he had been going round and round and getting nowhere. He didn't know exactly what he was looking for, but it had to be there whatever it was. So, Africa. Africa, so far. Well, Africa, said McKendrick. The big battle plane lanced through the skies over the Atlantic. It was a type used for company marines and had seats for 50 silos with space and lift capacity for tons of weaponry and gear. Johnny in the co-pilot seat flew easily and relaxed, flying with the left hand straight on course. Big as the plane was, they had had trouble keeping it from getting overloaded. It was all secret and would remain so. There would be no leaks. But friends with a small amount of activity attracted attention to them. Donaldine had shown up with 5 Scots who just happened by that day from their regular run to Scotland. Colonel Ivan, whose total force was about 80 valiant Red Army Cossacks, had to be persuaded to leave half of them taking care of the base. Angus was just an hour before departure from the heliport, but casually plunked the man £100 of tools into the back of the clean and quietly sat down uninvited. A rather fearful stack of weapons and explosives had magically appeared in the hands of four of the original Scots, led by Dwight. Dr. McKendrick seemed to have brought anything he thought he might ever need in every kind of practice. There had been a bit of a flap, that's what she said, just before the take-off. Patty, it seemed, had found the true love of her life in Biddy McLeod. Wah! Wah! And they wouldn't have known Bitty was also on board, except that Patty came rushing down the stairs to Hannibal to kiss him a childish, fearful goodbye. I think she's about 8 years old. I think she's about 7, 8 years old. Chrissy had said nothing, feeling bad. But suddenly an old woman had come up with Chrissy's possessions and taken her in tow, and it turned out Robert the Fox was putting them on a regular run to Scotland. His family wanted to meet Chrissy, he explained, and then Patty had to be packed up and sent with them. Then they were just closing the door when they had to open it again to take in Robert the Fox, complete with cloak and claymore, and he's on his miniskirt. They then were just passing the eastern coast of what had been the United States, and 2 battle planes had shown up. And it turned out to be Glencannon and 3 other pilots, just finished from their regular ferry runs. And where are you going? Well, with enough ammunition and fuel. And through the local command channel. They also had a coordinator who was an expert on Africa and also spoke French. It was not, Robert the Fox said, reproving in Johnny's ear, walking up the aisle from the back, the best planned raid he had ever participated in. And where was Johnny going? The coordinator was a young lad called Dwight Fawkes. He had recovered from having a Russian drag him out of bed before dawn, jump his possessions into a bundle and his reference books into a pack, and then spirit him to the plane. Sitting with the co-pilot next to Johnny, the coordinator was babbling away happily. We have an operation going in that part of Africa. I think it used to be called the Rainforest. So if this is all hush-hush, you better stay clear of the Federation unit operating there. We didn't know there was a mine site up north of there. You're lucky you didn't have your heads blown off, said Robert the Fox, leaning over the back of the co-pilot chair. Why, you see, we're not really a war unit. We don't operate like that. This is the first time we've felt a need for such hardware as you raiders call it. You mean you are going to fight sailors? Oh, no, the Brigantes. Usually tribes are so happy to see us, they're really drunk. But what's a Brigante? This certainly wasn't a well-researched, well-planned raid. He didn't even know their target or purpose. Well, it seemed that the Brigantes, as they called themselves, were a pretty strange lot. A coordinator had been dropped into a ruined city in that area to see whether or not anyone was still alive. And he almost got blown to bits with a grenade. A grenade? Sailors don't use grenades. Well, they knew that, and this was a powder grenade, smoking powder, bright orange flash, and then the coordinator was about to do battle with a club while bellowing into his radio for help, when a very old man clawed out from a wrecked basement and apologised in French. Ooh la la! And he had a very tattered old man. He was a very knackered old man. On his last pins, he'd been left to die by his squad because he was old and he couldn't keep up. Turned out he called himself a Brigante. He thought the coordinator was a stylo at first glance, and when he saw that he was human, and now thought the coordinator was part of a relief team sent by the bank. The what? Eh? Where? The what? Well, it seemed they had some kind of legend that they would be relieved by somebody, and they'd be held onto it for over 1,000 years. Incredible, they keep a tradition going that long. Talk to the Jews. What exactly demanded Robert the Fox? Is a Brigante? Well, that's what's making it so hard to really get in solid contact with them. And right this minute, they have 3 coordinators in there with the hopes of doing that. Oh, what's the brigade? Oh, right, well, it seems that at the time of this disaster, this is all according to, this abandoned old bloke. Of course, not confirmed. Some big international bank wanted to overthrow one of those African countries. Well, that sounds fucking familiar. And that they had gotten its freedom from some people called colonialists, and then it borrowed a lot of money and had a military coup and wouldn't pay the bank back or something like that. What's the oh right, Brigantes? What I'm telling ya. Listen. So this international bank collected up a lot of what they called mercenaries, soldiers for hire, and put together a 1,000-man unit. And they were going to nerve gas and wipe out the government, and all these mercenaries were equipped with gas masks. And our masks only have a filter out the outside air. This sounds very familiar, as in what America's been doing for 500 years. Yes, I'm getting to it. These were also called soldiers of fortune in ancient times. So they were just about to make their attack on the government when this new country showed up, and they were lying about. That doesn't grammar. So they were just about to make their attack on the government of this new country and were lying out in some mines in the desert. Oh, salt mines. And the silos hit the planet. Well, they have their gas masks on. Salt, said Johnny. Neutralizes silo gas. Oh, well, fine. Right, okay. So, anyway, there they were in Africa, fully armed and ready to go. And their target was wiped out for them. A mixed up lot as well. They were Belgians, French, Senegalese, English, Americans, or nationalities. Anybody the bank could hire, but a full, skilled military unit. They didn't have any of the names, so sometime then or later they started calling themselves Brigantes. Well, thank you at last. Wait, that's not all of it. The natives in that area were mostly deaf in the kill gas. So this unit drifted south. The tall trees and jungles seemed to have kept them masked from observation and recons and so on. They picked up women from missions and villages, white and black, and kept on banging. And that isn't all. This is why they're so hard to contact. After a couple 100 years, they got into a working arrangement with the silos. First you heard of that? Well, when it was us, we didn't get, yeah, true. And it makes them a little bit on the edgy side because they're wankers. Apparently, what they used to do was capture people and deliver them to the silos to shoot or torture or whatever else something double your height does. They never really went too close to the silos, but the silos, well, they couldn't operate in the swamps. The bodies are too heavy to walk, the ground is too soggy for tanks, trees are too tall to fly into, so why don't you just nuke it? So the Brigantes somehow got into a working arrangement. They'd tie up some people and leave them near a compound, and then the silos would come out, take the people for whatever torture they enjoy it. And the silos would leave some knickknacks like cloth or something on a log, a kind of trading arrangement. Well, all that was centuries ago and they ran out of people, but the silos never hunted them down. Swampy ground, tall trees, blah, 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 like I told you. Sounds like a pretty crazy people for unarmed coordinators to be fooling around with. Well, not really. We're pretty good in diplomacy and so on, but we got this order from the council just a few days ago to be sure and contact them and bring them in. And we are just doing our job. To tell the truth, the Brigantes are a bit strange. They keep their numbers down to 1,000 men and leave their old ones out to die. They're not married, but they just use the women whenever they want to. They seem to have a high mortality rate among children because they keep shagging them. Also, probably from hunting elephants with grenades. What the fuck else would you do? As long as you're going to run up to it and shove it up his ass. Oh, well, yeah, right, the grenades. They know how to make crude black powder, like charcoal, saltpeter from dung heaps and sulphur and, and they put it into a baked clay receptacle that is studded with stones and they stick a fuse in it and boom, like a cigar. And then they run right to an elephant to use one. I suppose that's part of the reason for mortality rate. They keep hunting elephants. I love a drumstick, though. Rescue? Oh, yeah, well, it seems their ancestors once had a firm promise from the International Bank to pull them out. And they haven't a clue what's going on in the outside world. Well, yeah, of course, the coordinators in there could use that. And, well, we can get them out. And that's near this mine site. Oh, it's to the south, Just thought you had better know. From what I can gather here, your target is a branch mine compound with just ordinary silos in it. Ordinary silos, snorted Tor. You got a handgun? No, you need it here. Take a spare one. No, don't try to try the history of a silo before you shoot it, okay? Just shoot the fucker. What are the old Irish? Fucking inbreds. David Fawkes took the gun like it would bite. They flew on toward Africa. Johnny lay behind a tree trunk, saturated with rain, perspiring from the heat, looking at the compound through infrared glasses. That did not do much good. For 3 soaking wet days they had been following a power line, the only sign of civilization that had landed on the power dam well enough. It was automatic and self-maintaining, and silo machinery had been superimposed upon the ancient manworks. They had no actual clue as to the position of the mine site beyond its existence. But Johnny knew that this power line, huge cables and metal pylons, themselves as ancient, would take them to it eventually. And eventually seemed to be the right word. Usually power lines had trees and brush cleared out, but not this one. No. There for countless years, a power line provided no more open sky than any other part of this vast forest. The old man map said this once been a country called the Huntazar, and that this portion of the extinct nation was the Ichiwiti Forest. Here the equatorial sun never reached the ground. It was umbrellaed first by cloud cover, and then by crowns of mighty trees that locked together in a canopy 100 feet above the ground. Great vines, a foot or more in diameter, wrapped around the gorged serpents like the trunks. Underfoot the thick humus, squished at every step, like a girl having a slow wink. And the rain came down, it dripped, it rooted down the trunks and vines, it poured through the slight opening into one felt he was trying to progress through a constant waterfall of varying thicknesses. And it was all in twilight. Oh, Edward Cullen. The game blended in deceptively with all the gloom, a dangerous fact that were. They had seen elephants, they had seen forest buffaloes and gorillas, and giraffe-like animals, and antelope, and 2 kinds of cat were routinely startled by them. The snarl of leopards and the roar of crocodiles, the chatter of monkeys, and the screech of peacocks makes you wish you could just nuke the fucking lot and have a great big barbecue. And these sounds were muted by the rain, and it made Johnny feel like the area was hostile and densely inhabited. The old man map said there were around 20,000 square miles of this forest, and that even at the height of man civilization it had never been completely explored. No wonder a mine site would go overlooked down here. The cheery forest, that wasn't nicked by that what's her name doing that movie series, was it? No, was that? Okay then. Was no place for backskin and moccasins and with a limp. Trying to progress through it made more difficult by the uselessness of trying to overfly it and the need for some sort of secrecy. They dared not use radios, drop lines from planes, could foul power cables, and if they reached them at all, the streams were infested with crocodiles and the crossings were even more dangerous. Well, a small party of them were here, only 20 of their force, scattered amongst the trees and ready to call in reserves or the planes if needed. The compound looked deserted, but then silos never wandered around out in the open. It had been built so long ago that it was too well overshadowed by the streaming canopy of trees. What had an employee had to do to be signed to this dismal, gloomy, startled, saturated outpost? Johnny was wondering. What out of bollocks? He was looking to the left of the compound for signs of track passageways. There would not be road for tires, but our track floating drives would have been crushed and killed vegetation. Oh yes, and there was a road over there, heading east towards that gloom. Oh yes, more lights beyond and opening through the trees, and for the landing of freighters, no doubt. Did the road go round that far? Did it do that? No, another road. One exit road through the forest and another one to the field. Never was there a more unplanned raid, Robert the Fox was muttering. But a well-planned raid took intelligent scouting first. He could never have imagined any train like this existed on the planet. Now Johnny was thinking, what did they really want here? Not dead silos, not really. He wanted live silos. That the silos would fight, he had no doubt. And that some would be killed, that was certain. But he was far more interested in live ones than dead ones. He was reaching into his belt to unfasten a miniature mounted radio to be used first in the hope that he had one in that compound. Whereas infrareds strayed over the right of the compound, there was a defined path, and at its end what appeared to be the wreck of a flatbed truck, ages old and mostly overgrown, hard to see in this twilight at noonday. The rain made it so hard to pick out details, even with the infrared. Johnny gave the glasses to Robert the Fox. "What do you see on that old truck bed?" Robert the Fox squirmed over to a new position. His cloak was wet as a soaking sock. "Something under a tarpaulin?" "A new tarpaulin, a barrel, 2 barrels, a package. Suddenly Johnny remembered the rambling story of David Fox. The coordinator was back of them, hunkered down, dripping wet. Johnny crawled back a short distance. What was that about putting things on a log for barter with a silo? Oh, yes. They put people there for the silos to see and then withdrew. And then the silos would come out and leave some trinkets. You do mean the bagantes, don't you, and not giraffes? I think I'm looking at an incomplete trade. Pass the word for Colonel Ivan. Ivan's English was improving remarkably fast under the interested tutelage of Biddy McLeod, and thought it was a shame for the grand man not to be able to talk in a human language. You racist little shit. This was giving Colonel Ivan a thick accent, but nevertheless he needed the Russian language coordinator less and less. Johnny found they had brought the coordinator too, leading Sir Robert to wonder what they might find your woman or a couple of silos on the plane as well. Scout way over to the right. Johnny amplifying it with a deceptive circle with his left hand, and watch it. What's this manoeuvre of this unplanned raid, Sir Robert the Fox? I don't like losing men. As the English say, it's bad form. Precaution is all. Are we going to just charge that place, Sir Robert the Fox? You can't even get a plain cover through those trees. I think I see an air cooling housing and a brilliant glass circulator over there. I can hit it from here, I think. Well, have you got any plain bullets? Aye, but it's surely not non-planned. But no. It's surely a known planned operation. They waited in the dismal drip and cascade of the rain. Somewhere off to the left, a leopard snarled, and it set off a wave of bird song, and monkey chitters. There was an abrupt thud, and about 20 feet behind them, they snaked back, and Ivan was standing back of a tree. On the ground at his feet lay a strange human, and he was cowed. He might have been any nationality, or any colour for that matter. He was dressed in monkey skins cut in such a way they looked oddly like a uniform. A strapped bag had fallen open under him, and a clay pot grenade had rolled out. Ivan was pointing to an arrow in his canteen. He pulled it out and gave it to Johnny. Over Johnny's shoulder the coordinator said, "Poison arrow. See that globe on its tip?" Outside a wink. Johnny took off Ivan's canteen and threw it away, making signs he was not to be drunk from that bottle now. Ivan detached the man's bow and his belt and offered it, but Johnny was kneeling beside the man and picking up the grenade. He had a fuse sticking out of it. He knew the type of fuse. It was silo. As soon as he had had Johnny's attention again, Ivan handed him a silo mine radio and pointed to the man. "He watch us. He talk." He pointed at the radio. Abruptly alert, Johnny saw that they might have an enemy in front of them and another one in the forest behind. He passed orders swiftly, though Robert the Fox, who was whipped off to their feet to get the small force facing both ways. Brigantes. The man at his feet had wide hide crossbelts, and spare arrows were arranged points into flaps along the leather. He had an odd pair of crudely made strapped boots, reminding Johnny of the remains of paratrooper boots he had seen in base storerooms. The man's hair was cut short and stood up. The face was scarred and brutal. The fellow was stirring, recovering from the unexpected clout of a rifle butt. Colonel Ivan promptly put a foot on his neck and prevented him from rising. Robert the Fox was back with a nod that depositions had been made. "They may have been scouting us for days. That's a silo radio." "Yes, and a bomb fuse. I think there's more here." A bomb exploded in an orange blast about 50 feet away. An assault rifle hammered out. They followed the period marked only by the startled rush of birds and monkeys through the drip of rain. Johnny got back into the log. Nothing was happening in the compound. Johnny put 2 riflemen in positions to cover it. We're boxed. Nicely planned raid, bitch. Take the rear guard first. Clean them out back there. Charge! Bawled Colonel Ivan, then said something in Russian. Vodka! Vodka! Klopnik! Vodka! There was an instant hammering of assault rifles, bursting grenades, racked through the smoke, poured through the rain. Running a feet, men covered each and other as they went forward in alternating waves. Screams, Russians, and Scotch battle cries. There was a lull. There was another furious hammer of assault rifles. Another lull. A voice, hoarse, rising from the birds in the rain. We surrender. English? Not French. The coordinator looked confused. Some distant running feet of Robert the Fox drew some of his men back, and the voices to prevent it being a trap. Johnny grabbed the blast rifle from the Scot and threw himself down. Pinpoint, now flame! He cut loose with a savage burst on the breathed gas housing. The ancient outside metal peeled away into repeating impacts like hide. There was a clank and hiss, and Johnny gave it another burst. They waited. No silos came rushing out. The place must be flooded with air by now, but there was no reaction. The rain came down, the birds and monkeys quietened. Drifting smoke, black powder smoke from the grenades, was harsh to the nose. Johnny looked toward the oar-plane landing field beyond the short road. It was deserted. The Scot carrying the radio equipment answered his beckoning. The covering scrap of the tarpaulin was cascading rain. Johnny checked the set. It was working. He flipped the planetary pilot band and picked up the mic. Flight to Nairobi, standing by. It would sound like routine pilot traffic, but the code had been prearranged. While the 2 ships they had left near the power plant, Nairobi meant fly to our beacon, and standing by meant don't come in shooting, but be alert. Dunleavy's voice crackled back. All the passengers aboard, we are on their way. Johnny took the mine radio off his belt and turned it to constant beep, which was used by miners when trapped or caught in a cave-in. It would act like a radio beacon for the planes. He stabbed a finger at the 3 of his force. All the men passed. He handed one of them the mine radio to put in the tree. This makes no sense. Why is there no punctuation? Johnny took the mine radio off his belt and turned it to the constant beep, 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 which was used by miners when trapped or caught in a cave-in. It would act as a radio beacon for the planes. He stabbed a finger at 3 of his force. As the men passed, he handed one of them the mine radio and put it in a tree in a field. Yeah. He did not have somebody proofreading his work. That is pretty obvious. That or they fell asleep. Or got abducted by aliens. Assault rifles held low, running wide of the compound, pausing to give one another cover. They raced forward toward the landing field. Shortly, one of them, seeing as a blur through a dull curtain of rain, but brighter out there in the field edge, raised a hand in an all clear. They would give the plane's landing cover as they came in. Johnny slung the blast rifle over his shoulder and hobbled across the compound perimeter, his cane not sinking so deep on this more travelled ground. He could hear pumps going further south. They would be... Sorry, that was a gorilla's. Thudda, 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 thudda. That would be where the mine workings were. He saw that a branch of the power cables that they had been used to trace this place turned off halfway up the road, somewhere into the field. He followed it. A squat hut made of stone sat there in the trees, festooned with insulators and surrounded by pipes. He recognized it as the fuel and ammunition manufacturing hut. Ha ha! They had used one of this branch mine, probably to utilize and access the power cable available from the hydroelectric plant. The ground one was all roughed up from recent foot and flatbread traffic. The door was ajar, but not a pot, just ajar. He gave it a quick push with his cane. What a jumble!
Fuel and ammunition, Captain says, will usually stack neatly on the racks in these places. Side bins usually contain the various minerals used in concocting the contents for the canisters. A recent, sorry, I had a bit of curry earlier. A recent flurry of activity had left minerals spilled on the floor and damaged unusable containers underfoot. This place had been very busy until recently. He knew it took a bit of time to stir up and charge the brews that became fuel and ammunition and seal them into canisters. Had they worked here flat out for days? A week? He made his way up to the exit road that must go to the main mine site. Using a shortcut between the two roads, he looked at the brush on both sides of the exit road. Ordinarily, his educated eye would have been able to track this easily, but the pouring rain had made it difficult. He bent, examining some twigs broken from the underbrush that bordered the road. Some breaks, the ones that pointed toward the compound, must be several days old. Others very fresh, still leaking sap. They were broken in the direction of the main mine site up near the lake, and the old mine maps had said was once called Lake Victoria.
Better not tell David.
A convoy had come up here in many days, weeks ago, and had gone out only hours ago. A big convoy. He glanced at the exit road, half expecting to see trucks and tanks coming down it back to the compound. The tactical situation was not ideal, and they had a small force of brigantes holding out in the woods back of them. Somewhere near or farther must be the better part of 1,000 brigantes, and up this road he looked at the traces on the ground. Or there could be ground drives to reveal large numbers of saddle vehicles, or flatbacks, and maybe even some tanks. You're welcome. He heard the planes now, the sign that wouldn't matter anymore, but the uproar of the recent skirmish, and any convoy on that road wouldn't hear anything above their own motor drives. The vast canopy of treetops that made this place a twilight not only prevented anyone from looking down at the exit road, but also from seeing anything upon it, but also preventing anyone on it from looking up the skirt, the trees and knickers and whatever. A poor tactical situation. They could not fight a convoy, probably escorted with tanks, and this water-saturated, hemmed-in forest. Their planes were of no use to them. He made his way over to the landing field. Sky, not much sky, but enough to get the ore freighters up and down. Leaking sky, but still sky. He hadn't seen any sky in 3 days. The soldiers were in the trees covering the field. The mine radio bleeper was set in a 15-inch diameter vine that coiled like a huge snake up a tall tree. Maybe this field had once been bigger, but the jungle and the trees had encroached deeply. The big marine attack battleplane rang down directly from overhead, letting the smaller battleplane cover it from above as was proper. Then the plane mushroomed a puddle of field water into a geyser and came to a halt. It was Donaldine. He swung the door open and sat there grinning, glad to see Johnny. Robert the Fox came rushing up. The side door of the big plane swung open, and the officer of the remaining part of the force looked questioningly. Robert waved to him and just sit tight, don't get out, there's no point, there's no emergency, and got into the smaller battle plane with Johnny and Donaldine. Johnny was rapidly filling in Donaldine on events. There's a convoy up that road headed for the main mine site. I think they came down here for fuel and ammunition and then went back. Ah, said Donaldine, that explains it. Typical Donaldine, he had not been sitting quietly by waiting for their call. He could get that, he said, back at the dam or way upstairs, but so he left the big attack plane at the dam and on the radio on standby so he could recall him if he needed to. And he went to the mine site, and what they used to call Lake Albert, under surveillance, and by going all the way up there and following the normal traffic routes, his instruments and view screens could penetrate rain and cloud, even though he couldn't see a thing through that canopy of trees. The main mine site, he recalled, had been knocked out on day 92 by a pilot, McCardle, and he'd had a bit of trouble. The silos had attempted to loft 2 battle planes from McCardle and nailed them. They're right in the hangar launch door, blocking it. He'd blown the power lines to bits and knocked out the breeze gas and fuel and ammunition dumps, and the silos had gotten 2 batteries of anti-aircraft into operation, and he had to knock those out as well. This was a fight where the co-pilot had been wounded, and Johnny and Robert, they remembered that story. A very fighting mine site. Anyway,
Donaldine went on. On his overflights from 100,000 feet up during the last 3 days, he hadn't found any current movement of the place. But he showed them the pictures he'd gotten from the screens. Those apes had cleared away the hangar doors. That's it, just right there. See those shadows under the trees on the edge of the field? No, there. 10 battle planes on standby. Nobody ever came back to mop up that mine site. And those guerrillas, they've been busy. They're very racist, aren't they? Johnny looked at the several pictures. One had been taken from a lower some point, and he examined the profiles, the planes half hidden under the trees. He looked at Donaldine. Yes, just like you described the one you put on the gas drone. A Mark 32 low-flying ground strafers, heavily armoured. Not much range, but they can always carry extra fuel cartridges. Those silos, said Johnny, are not setting up to defend their mine site. They are probably desperate for breathe gas. They had their fuel blown up. See the dolly trucks and that grass in front of their Mark 32s? They were dollied there, not flown there. He pointed to the huts, half seen through the trees. They've been over there days and days, manufacturing fuel and ammunition like mad. They used what fuel they could scrape together to get that convoy here. They grabbed all the breathe gas, so I'm sure, and they're on their way back. The only other big supply of breathe gas is over in the Central Compound in America. That's where they're headed. With those 10 Mark 32s, they could turn this whole wall around the other way. He opened the map, water still dripping off him and onto it. He traced out the exit road. He found it left the forest, ran across the plain into a long ravine. That was open to the sky. The road went on towards Lake Albert, but there was a flat place there in the ravine. It looked like some of the pictures that Donaldine had taken. We've got a battle coming up. He measured the distance between here and he gave it to Sir Robert. It would take them a day, maybe a day and a half to reach that spot. 2 days to the main compound, since that road is awful bad. Meanwhile, we have to take care of the main force brigantes. Pack Colonel Ivan, 4 raiders and a mortar into this place. Tell him he's got to hold that pass until relieved. And you, Donaldine, stand by up there to make sure that convoy doesn't get through. Remember, we're only after live silos. We're after stopping a counterattack on the Denver area, says Sir Robert. Thor had gone down and put yet another appearance at the Mountains of the Moon as Johnny. He was a fair rider and would put on a bit of a show for them and say hello, and he was scheduled to visit another tribe south of there. He was a bit far to recall, and it would mess up their plans to expose Johnny for who he really was. I'm really sorry you've only got one battle plane. Donaldine smiled happily. But there's only one battle, Johnny lad. There's only and he's Scottish and Irish, sorry. They all wear miniskirts and shag sheep and haggises and things. Robert the Fox was rapping out orders very shortly. Colonel Ivan and 4 soldiers struggled up through the rain carrying a bazooka and a blast mortar and other equipment. They'd forgotten about the coordinator to translate for them, and there's a very tight fit inside to get all these people into the one battle plane. Sir Robert briefed Colonel Ivan. He smiled cheerfully. Ambushes and passes in the Hindu Kush were much more complicated. Have no fear, Marshal Johnny and War Chief Robert. The pass would be held ski. Life solo ski. Well, not quite ski as satisfactory ski, but have no fear ski. The Valiant ski, Red Army ski, would perform ski. The battle plane, when they're not invading Ukraine, the battle plane roared up 7 men in one battle plane to stop a convoy of dozens of silos and battle tanks. Donaldine waved down to them through the rain and was gone. True, it was that the stockpiles of breed gas and ammunition had been stripped to the last cartridge, and grass and shrub had been crushed dead for years. 1/4 of an acre had been the extent of the breed gas dump, 1/2 an acre the extent of the fuel and ammunition dump, and it was all gone. Angus opened up the lock of the compound's main door, and the reserve troops from the attack carrier went sprinting in, covering each other. The place was empty, not a soul. It had 4 levels of offices, shops and hangars. Pumps were running, lights were all on, and it was a jumble of hasty departure.
Johnny stood in the corridor outside the recreation area. What a dismal, dank place. Mould was glowing on things, water was dripping down the walls, only kept cleared by the pumps. What an awful place to try to live, even for a silo. He thumbed through the sheaves of radio dispatches that had been spouting out of a printer. Even the paper was wet in this hot, humid place. They had been monitoring all bands, particularly the pilot band. It was odd to see, Andy, can you bring a printer from the Pilgrims to Calcutta? Can you please bring another flying suit from some fuel at McAllister? The Scot pilots largely talked silo with a jumble of English and must have looked right mad to the company employees, huddled here in this remote jungle, not knowing what was really going on but monitoring every scrap of it. A Russian raced up to him holding a silo breathe mask. He must have found it someplace. It still had a bottle attached and was operating. Johnny sniffed it and it buzzed his nose passages. Let's see, it took about 12 hours for his flask to run out, and this was still half full, quarter full maybe. He shook it to see how much of the breathed gas in liquefied form was still there. The silos had left within the last 8 or 9 hours. He hobbled along the corridor, sweat streaming off him. The pump was running air to the place, but it didn't make it any cooler. The usual silo stink, no, worse, for it was mixed up with mould. Bubbles of sound floated in from various parts of the interior levels, but his people were still searching. There was a mine phone off its buttons, and he listened at it, still alive. He could even hear the mine pumps running in the distant tungsten workshops. This mine site wasn't as old as most. Probably been moved here from elsewhere in the forest when they found another tungsten deposit. They were mad for tungsten. The view screens in this mine manager's office were on. Johnny looked at the big electric roasting ovens of the mine. They conveyed and roasted oil there. Steam was coming off in coils. They must have considered this upset of the planet temporary, for they had still gone on mining. He went down the stairs and led into the hangar. The usual silo steps, twice the height of a human step. Hard to negotiate with this leg. Well, he was getting better. He'd sure been able to use a blast rifle today. No speed in his arm, but it was improving. He'll soon be able to murder anybody he likes. The hangar was in the same disarray as the other parts of the interior, and it still had vehicles. Angus was poking around in the vast, overlit interior. He had a big crayon in one hand and was putting an X on vehicles he thought couldn't be readily made operational. 2 small tanks. Angus had X to the mounts already. Several flying mine platforms, no X's, so they were okay. Several flatbeds, only half of them usable though. A silo sign for ordnance was on a door. Johnny went in. Blast mortars, even a pile of shells with them. Contrary to interior storage ammunition regulations, well, he came out and grabbed Angus. Get 2 of those big flatbed trucks out there, get a flying mine platform on each of them, and put a mortar and ammunition on each of those flying platforms. Pile those tops in wads in front of the flatbeds for armour, and put one of the rigs outside, and put the other one just inside the door of the hangar. Yes, we have fuel as well. He told Sir Robert to get him and 4 men and a driver for each of the rigs, and to dispatch one of the rigs as soon as possible to get made up and to tail that convoy. That rig? They can fly the rig down there on the platform, get it off the truck, and lay a mortar barrage down. They can block the road by blasting trees across it. Get the convoy tailed, but not too close, and if they turn back, block their way. And if it doesn't work out and they get chased back here, the other rig is just inside the hangar door, and we can be taken out to help defend the place. Put another 4 men and a driver with it. I'll be taking it when we return here from our visit with the Brigantes. You'll be chasing that convoy too? Ranked among the best plans you could ever have, and the most carefully done operations of history. This one is undoubtedly the very finest. He went off to get it handled, muttering about the flatbed handling trucks. A Scot came racing up, and Johnny, sir, I think you'd better come down to the 3rd level. Johnny limped with difficulty down the next archway into the stairway, and he was not at all prepared for what they had found. It was a big room they apparently used for shooting practice. A sort of interior range. Some Russians were staring around, staring at something on the floor. They were looking at him with varied expressions of distaste and disapproval. The Scot directing him stopped, mutely pointing downwards. In the middle of a veritable lake of congealed blood lay what must have been two old women. It was hard to tell from the scraps. The strands of grey hair, brown skin, and ripped clothing lay, with scattered bone chips in two mounds. The mangled messes and some spent blast gun caps told their grisly story. Several silos had stood here, and bit by bit, inch by inch, with hundreds of cruelly non-lethal shots, had carved the two women apart. What a hellish bedlam of shots and screams and laughter this place must have been just a few hours ago. Dr. McKendrick, summoned by someone else, came in. He stopped, avoiding standing in the blood. Impossible to tell from the temperature, not enough to check, but maybe 4 hours ago from the coagulation. Women maybe 40 or 50 years old, worn out by hard work, and they carved their limbs of inch by inch and shot by shot. He stood up and confronted Johnny. Why do sailors do things like that? It gives them pleasure. They think it's delicious. The pain, the agony. Johnny looked at McKendrick. It's about the only time they feel joy. These Jewish people are just vile. The doctor's face said, I feel so much better about the autopsies on silos. A Russian had been moving something with a stick he had found. When in doubt, poke it with a stick.
Hold it, says Johnny. He stepped around the blood pool and picked up the object. Robert the Fox had come in. He halted in shock. Eek! The object has been held up with a tam o' shanter, the bonnet of a Scot. Nobody of a Scot, just his tam o' shanter. Fairly new, the kind the coordinates wore.
Johnny stood in the drenching rain and looked at the platform of the ancient wrecked flatbed. Here within the last 2-3 days, perhaps only hours ago, stood 3 bound human beings. 2 old Briganti women and 1 young, virile, mini-skirted Scot, waiting for the silos to come out and seize them, helpless to move or escape, probably covered from behind by poisoned arrows and grenades. Just how many Bantu and Pygmies had stood in this place in the same way, captured and sold by the Brigantes, and the silos had come and taken them, bought them from the one-time mercenaries, and the articles now laying there. The 2 old women had died in agony. The fate of the Scot was unknown. A Russian lance had gingerly tested the flatbed and bartered goods for booby traps. If Johnny knew silos and they felt this trade ended their future relations, it would have been rigged to explode. It wasn't. The silo employees must think that when they retook the planet they'd be back. Johnny examined the goods, sealed metal containers, 100 pounds of sulfur, or in this century, kilos. Another 100 of nitre under the tarpaulins lay a big coil of mild fuse, article that could be used, added only to charcoal, to make grenades. In a smaller red pack, mine radio power cartridges. Such was the price of 3 human lives. Johnny turned his back on it and walked to where the Russian officer and his men were holding the captured Brigantes. There were 17 of them left alive. They sat with their hands gripped behind their heads, looking down at the ground, very still under the ring of assault rifles, and 7 wounded Brigantes lay about groaning and moving in the thick humus. 12 dead Brigantes had been hauled in and lay in a heap. After 17 sensed a new presence and looked up. He was a barrel-chested brute, teeth broken long ago, face scarred and pitted, a huge jaw, short-cut hair. He was dressed in monkeyskins cut in a military pattern. 2 bandoliers slotted with poisoned arrows crossed his chest. His eyes looked like scummed pills. What did you follow on us?
What's your foreigners for?
He's English. Could have been English if you unscrambled it. I think, said Johnny, it was the other way around. What were you doing here?
Book of finishing articles of all. You currently give away the rank and serial number.
All right. What did you say?
Off Murphy, Captain. The commandos, occupying forces, Japanese Hans and Barley. Usually 49 nations.
Johnny turned to David Fawkes, the coordinator, with a raised eyebrow.
To have a myth alleging that someday the International Bank will send a relief force, I think the United Nations, Jewish, was some political organisation, Jewish, that looked after small countries and interfered when they were attacked, Jewish. It's remarkable that they could keep a myth going that long, Jewish.
Where is your main body?
Don't have it, I'm not going to conceal the number.
I don't know why they sound Scouse, but in my brain they do. It's the most illiterate English language I can think of. Well now, said Johnny, if we were this relief force, we'd have to know, wouldn't we?
If you were for relief force, you'd know where it was. The relief force is already there. We're going to be there only someday.
I think we better talk to your commander.
Don't sniff, he's going to be one in the main camp. That's not far from here.
Johnny shrugged and waved a hand at the Russian officer as though to go ahead. The Russian nosed up their assault rifles.
Took 2 days march from here.
How long ago did his captures over the flying platform?
The platform?
Johnny turned to the Russians again.
Yes. Yeah, we put the captives on there yesterday afternoon.
The fate of the Scot was important. If he was alive, Johnny cast around for what he could do. He had a makeshift tail on the convoy. He had an ambush in front of it. There was no flanking in these woods. Indeed, a ground car, much as a truck, would almost run into itself trying to get around these trees, or even be able to make headway over this long, soaked, wet humus. No wonder the Slavs had their own arrangements with the Brigantes. He decided he'd have to wait for the battle. He told the Russian coordinator that the orders for the Russian officer, in a very gingerly alert fashion, they began to strip the Brigantes, going over their monkey skin uniforms for knives, concealed weapons, of which they abounded. They were in the process of trying the descendants of the long ago mercenaries when Captain... They were in the process of trying the descendants of the long ago mercenaries when Captain pleaded. There's no punctuation.
You mind if I take some wounded?
Johnny let him go ahead and...
Murphy! Of course you gotta be Murphy. Please fucking not to be right.
Jumped up and grabbed a heavy club and pounced on the 7 wounded before he could be stopped. With expert swings that landed crushing thuds on their skulls, he killed them. Smiling and gratified, he threw the club down and turned to a Russian with hands so they could be retied.
Thank you.